In this video, I'm going to go through 4 of the biggest myths when it comes to learning Spanish. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid, I'm 15 years old, and I became a polyglot when I was 13 years old after getting fluent in Spanish in the summer of 2022. Here's how I sounded before then.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español. Yo quiero entender hablantes de español, hablantes nativos de español.
Y ahora pasado 2 años y puedo hablar en español, puedo tener conversaciones con los nativos, puedo, no sé, hablar de lo que quiera. The way I got fluent was that the only reason I started was because this guy in my class started like using Duolingo, and he started learning a little bit more than the rest of us. If you don't know, in Sweden you choose between Spanish or French, and so I chose Spanish. So this guy in my class, he used to use Duolingo in 7th grade. It's a very long time ago. 2 years ago, right? And so he started like putting us on Duolingo pretty much. Everyone started doing Duolingo in the class. And my whole thing was that I wanted to be the best because I was always obsessed with like just being the best when it comes to anything. And so because I wanted to become the best in Spanish, I did a ton of research on different apps. Eventually, I found this app called Language Transfer, and that sort of explained grammar, and that sort of taught me a lot of the things that I know, or at least a lot of the concepts and like ideas in learning Spanish that I know. Then I also started discovering Spanish like on YouTube, where I found most of the YouTubers were very like bad. But a few videos talked about how they got fluent extremely quickly in like 30 days, and a lot of people didn't even believe them. And so I was thinking, okay, let's go into this. And the way they sort of explained their method, which wasn't even that conclusive, but the way they explained the strategy was that instead of like learning Spanish through memorization and flashcards and stuff, they talked about how learning Spanish should be done, like how it is done with natives. And natives learn by speaking and understanding with natives. And so the whole method, the whole strategy to both of these YouTubers, one of them was Shauma, the other one was called Language Lords. Both like the grounds, the sort of main concepts was that they learned through speaking and understanding natives, like real natives, fast spoken Spanish. That's what they both did. That's like the basis of both of their methods. So I sort of put those methods together to sort of create my own method, where based on those concepts I created 2 exercises I called transcript training, which was inspired from the Language Lords method, and then I also created an exercise called narrate, elaborate, contemplate, which goes into sort of what Shauma did. So I sort of fused both of their videos together to make my own method. And within the summer of 2022, after that summer, I spent around more or less an hour a day, probably less, but let's just say an hour a day studying in Spanish. And by the end of it, I was able to have like an hour-long conversation fluent in Spanish. And the result I got from this was that, firstly, I was now fluent in another language, which means I became a polyglot because I was born in Sweden, so I knew Swedish, but I grew up watching English shows, and like I went to an English kindergarten. But my parents are Azeri, so I speak Azeri. I technically have then 3 native languages, but then on top of that, because I had now learned Spanish, it was like another flex. And people, especially older like people, like parents, they started almost thinking that I was like a prodigy, or I was like super smart. But the real truth is I wasn't actually that smart. It was just the method that got me there, that made me seem as though I was a prodigy or that I was super smart. And then also like a year later, our Spanish class, we had a trip to Spain, and there I was able to communicate with pretty much everyone. But even though, again, it wasn't perfect, I was conversationally fluent in that way. I was able to speak in Spanish with them pretty much. We had like an exchange thing where I stayed at their house and they would stay at my house in Sweden, so we would have like this exchange, and the entire time I would speak Spanish with their family. Granted, they were speaking slower, and like it wasn't necessarily as though I was as fluent as them, of course not, but I was still able to communicate with them, and it was like a good test of my Spanish, even though like my Spanish wasn't like perfectly great or anything. So I was still able to communicate, and it was just a really good experience. But also what it did for me internally was I thought that I was smarter myself, because it was like, oh, now I'm a polyglot. I thought that I was smarter than I actually was, because it was as though like I'm a polyglot without putting as much effort that I thought I would need to put. But also it just made me so much more confident in language learning, how learning languages work. And that even got me to be able to like improve my other languages even better, because now I sort of understood how language learning works. And it also got me extremely confident in teaching Spanish, which is what I've been doing. Now, to get to the point, the first myth, which you probably picked up on now, is that you have to use Anki or Quizlet or anything like one of those flashcards app to memorize. The myth that you have to use flashcards to memorize to learn words in Spanish. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see literally everyone making, because what I do is on these videos, I have a coaching service which I provide. If you can check in the description, that's where I like have it. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, is trying their best to just memorize the language. This is what like we learn at school, right? Because in school, the teacher gives you like a 45-word vocabulary Quizlet like link, and then you have to memorize all of the words using flashcards, for example. You probably heard in the first story I told you that I didn't use any flashcards. And even during the summer of 2022, when I did have an idea of the methods that I was going to use, transcript training and narrate, elaborate, contemplate. But by the way, I hadn't created those methods. I hadn't created names for them. Those were just kind of like what I was trying to do. It wasn't a fully created and established method. I've made it now because now I know exactly how it is, and I've been able to replicate it and help people with it. But at the time, I was just trying different things. And one of the things I did try was, the Anki deck, where I went through, I wrote like 300 words. I think I had like 120 word sort of vocabulary list of this random words, like the word smoothie. And I'm not saying that didn't help at all, because it slightly helped me. Slightly. I still remember probably 20 of those words, which is still pretty impressive since I did it 2 years ago, right? But it's even still, the point is that flashcards are for memorizing. And here's the main takeaway. The way I got fluent is that I watched native content, and when I didn't understand, I repeated it, okay? That is the main like sauce, right? You have to learn through repetition. That is the key. Repetition is always key. The difference is spaced repetition learning, aka flashcards, right? The problem with that is that you are not learning Spanish in context. You're not learning Spanish being spoken in natives, like native speak. You're not learning Spanish when it's spoken as fast, because you're only focusing on a singular word. You're not focusing it in context. For example, the word está can be pronounced as ta in certain contexts, like taki, right? He is here or she is here, está aquí. Or acá I've literally heard that in one day, say acá estoy. Acá estoy. But estoy can be pronounced as toy in certain situations. The point being, it's not that they changed the word, it's just that it's pronounced more natively. It's pronounced faster and it's pronounced more as though a native said it, rather than estoy hablando español, And so the biggest myth, and this is one of the most important things, is that flashcards are useful in any way. Flashcards, the only one use they have is for short-term memorization of words. But do you want to be able to say the word smoothie? Or do you want to be able to have a fluent conversation? It's like you get good at what you do. So if you're learning from Spanish, like from natives, then you're going to be good at understanding natives. If you get good at doing flashcards, guess what? You're going to be good at doing flashcards. But you never wanted to be good at doing flashcards. You wanted to be good at understanding natives when they speak. So how about we understand natives that they speak? Either way, it's repetition. Right? Either way, you don't understand something in the video, in the native, like when you're speaking to a Spanish person, they say something you don't understand, that you ask them to repeat. It's the same as though you go through flashcards and you repeat the same word. Both are repetition, right? But one has native speaking it, is spoken fast like a native, and is actual spoken, you have to listen to it. The other one is read, it's not pronounced in any way. You pronounce it the way you think, which you're not a native, so you don't know how to say it correctly, most likely. And the words aren't in context, because the word está isn't pronounced está in every situation, and the word se isn't used the same in every single situation. So you don't learn Spanish, you learn like blocks of it, but not the entire thing. And so bottom line is, you didn't get fluent as a kid using flashcards, so why would you ever do it again? Because there's one fact of the universe, is that you're fluent in your own native language, right? So you didn't use flashcards to get fluent in your native language. So why would you use flashcards to learn when you know it hasn't worked? Like every single person I see who's trying to get fluent, who started in COVID 4 years ago, they all tried this memorization thing and it just didn't work. So why bother? Why waste your time? The second myth is that you can't start speaking from day one. And this is one of the biggest problems. Let me tell you a story actually. When I was going through to find like what methods would work for me to get fluent in 2022. Firstly, there was a lot on the line. Before the summer of 2022, I had already been using a language transfer to sort of get the grammar down a little more. And before the summer of 2022, I told all my friends, I told everyone at school that I was gonna get fluent in Spanish by the end of that summer. And so there was a lot on the line, because I also made it into like my personality, where like it was like a thing that I was trying to get fluent in Spanish when like I wasn't fluent in Spanish. And so as I discovered these two YouTubers, Shauma and Language Lords, the two main things I picked up on for Language Lords, he's like a YouTuber, right? In his video where he got fluent very quickly, you probably seen it's a very viral video, okay? He explains that the two main things he did, there were two main exercises he did. A speaking exercise and a listening exercise. And both of those, more or less done like as close to natives as possible. He watched native Spanish content instead of kid Spanish content, for example, or like slow Spanish content. And the speaking exercise, I'm gonna be honest, I tried a speaking exercise and it wasn't that good, but I tweaked it to make it my own sort of version, where I took the inspiration from that. And so from there, I sort of imagined two ladders, where it's essentially the two things we need to learn Spanish. I now realize this is a formula for becoming fluent. The formula is speaking multiplied by understanding. Speaking times understanding equals fluency. Because let's think about what a fluency is. It's a fluent conversation between you and me, right? It is fluidity in our speech. It is, hi, my name is Hamid, what's your name? Your name is Frank or whatever, right? What do you like to do in your free time? Oh, I like to do this because I blah, blah, blah. That's fluidity in our conversation. It is literally, by definition, I'm speaking, you're understanding, and then we swap. You speak and I'm understanding. And then it's a loop of that. It's literally speaking multiplied by understanding. It's speaking times understanding. It's literally what I call it. It's the fluency equation. And so the two things we need to learn Spanish, and everything else is genuine garbage. Two things we need is an exercise where we speak Spanish and an exercise where we listen Spanish or hear Spanish or watch Spanish, right? That is like two exercises. We need to speak Spanish and understand Spanish. Why? Because our goals are to speak Spanish and understand Spanish. It is that simple. And so where did this myth come from that you can't start speaking from day one? And this is where the other YouTuber, Shauma, comes in. He talked about in that video where he got fluent in Spanish in like 20 days. It was insane. He essentially did only that. He spoke Spanish with natives and he understood Spanish with natives. That's literally all he did for literally like 8 hours a day or something crazy. And after 20 days, he was fluent. So the main takeaway there was that speaking from day one means just building sentences from day one. And people like to say that like, oh, if you start speaking from day one, you're gonna be making mistakes and then you're gonna remember those mistakes and then you're not going to be able to fix them in the future. That is genuine garbage. That is like actual, like, I don't know how to, it's just bad advice. Firstly, you don't want to be speaking incorrect Spanish, but you want to be speaking Spanish in any way. Let me help you right now. Words that end with AL in English are the same in Spanish. So normal is normal. The only difference is that they're pronounced with Spanish vowels. So O-A instead of O-A, right? A, normal. So how do you say formal? Formal. How do you say informal? Informal. How do you say personal? Personal. Good job. You're speaking Spanish right now from day one. The word for it is in Spanish is es. How do you say it's personal? Es personal. How do you say it's normal? Es normal. If you want to make something a negative in Spanish, you stick a no before the verb we're talking about. In this case, the verb is es, so no es is it isn't. Much easier than English. So it's not normal. No es normal. It's not personal. No es personal. The word for why is por qué. So how do you say why is it not personal? ¿Por qué no es personal? And if you want to make it a question, you just make it sound like a question. ¿Por qué no es personal? Right there and there, from day one, you have just made a sentence in Spanish and you've spoken Spanish. From day one. But if you don't have any proof that this works, this is what language transfer did for me. Language transfer, what I just went through now, is pretty much like what language transfer did, where he essentially started making us speak from day one on the app. Language transfer is an app where it's like, it's a course video pretty much. And so I started speaking Spanish from day one. You, when you were a kid, you started speaking your native language ever since you were able to speak, right? Even though you made mistakes, right? Like even though as a kid, your grammar isn't perfect, right? Like, right now, you're fluent in your native language, right? So where did this myth come from that you can't start speaking from day one because you're gonna make mistakes and that it's positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement rather? Like, no, that is not how it works. It is like you yourself have proved it wrong by just you existing, because you existing means that you know your native language and you learned your native language through making mistakes. Third myth when it comes to learning Spanish is that you can't get fluent in 1 month. This is something that I see people always calling BS on. They're saying, oh, you didn't learn in 30 days. Or some YouTubers are like, why you shouldn't get fluent in 30 days, or that like getting fluent that quickly is unrealistic. During that summer of 2022, firstly, let's talk about every single hour I put in studying. I took the language transfer course, so I spent around 12 hours on that. right? And I took it again, so 24 hours. And then I did about an hour a day. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't do an hour a day, but I don't wanna lie. So let's just say I did an hour a day during the summer, which equates to about 90. So I spent around about 120 hours. Like that's being generous, like assuming that I also did Duolingo, right? So 120 hours total of studying Spanish, which is when I got fluent. Like that's how much it took, okay? That is how much it took for me to be conversationally fluent. Again, this is not perfect Spanish, but it was at a point where I was able to have conversations and people like were impressed. When I came back to school at that point, we had a new Spanish teacher. I was able to speak Spanish for people in my class. Some people in class were like kind of surprised. And in this process, think about it, I spent 120 hours studying to get conversationally fluent. That is, if we want to divide that by 30, that's literally 4 hours a day. So let's think about this in a more practical way. Those videos online, Language Lords, for example, he got fluent in like 46 days and he spent 8 hours a day studying. If I got relatively conversationally fluent in 120 hours of studying, he did double the amount in like half the time or a quarter of the time. So it's like, of course it's possible, right? Like I've proved it to myself that it's possible. So all those people, all the comments like saying that it's impossible, all the comments saying that he cheated or anything like that, it's honestly like, bro, you're doing the wrong things. Because it is possible to get fluent that quickly. Because I've done it myself. I've proved it to myself that it's possible. There are people that, this Shauma guy got fluent in 20 days. If there's one thing to think that, oh, they're geniuses or they're exceptions. I also thought that. You know, in the beginning, I was literally like that. I was one of those. I was one of the people that were sort of doubting it. I was like, bro, come on, it didn't seem realistic, right? But then I was like, okay, let me try this. And I did it and I realized it was completely right. If I got fluent in 4 hours a day for 30 days, or, you know, technically it was 3 months of 1 hour a day, and then plus like 30 hours. Sure, right? But it's the same time in terms of like hours studied. If I got fluent in half the time they spent to get fluent, and their fluency was, by the way, higher than my fluency. I was like conversational. They were like actual, like kind of at the level that I am at right now. Even now, I spent probably no more than 200 hours studying Spanish. And by the way, the studying I do is completely different to everyone else. And this is probably something that you probably noticed while watching these videos. So a lot of people seem to think that it's extremely impossible to get fluent in 1 month. I would say it is unrealistic in the sense that it's unrealistic to study 4 or 5, 6 hours a day for 30 days. Most people don't have that amount of time, right? I didn't get fluent in 30 days, but it's possible to get fluent in 30 days. And that goes into the last myth, which is that grammar is hard and it takes a long time to learn. When I first started learning this language transfer course, which I discovered from this YouTuber, another YouTuber actually, you know, I went through the course, and in the course, he sort of explained grammar, and the actual method that he taught was essentially just give me a grammar rule and then let's exercise it. I literally just did now. I gave you a rule. Words that end with al are the same in Spanish. So normal is normal. The no comes before the verb, so no es normal. The word for why is the same as the word for because, and that is porque. So now we get a sentence, right? The reality is most people somehow still don't know that you don't have to memorize grammar. You see, my framework for learning grammar, which I discovered from language transfer, I'm not even gonna take any credit. Language transfer gave me the concept. I made it into my own sort of method, but it was inspired from language transfer. In the course, the way the course works is that it's a teacher and it's a student. The teacher is just teaching the student, and your job is to essentially follow along with the student. So when the teacher asks a question, you pause and then you answer it for yourself, and then you see what the student said, and then you're kind of in the lessons, for example. You're like in there with them. One of the lessons, the student asked the teacher, wait, so isn't this just memorization? And the teacher said something very good, which when I heard this, it was like, oh, that's what it is. So the student was like, wait, but isn't this just memorization? And the teacher, the Spanish teacher, he said, well, no, it's rather internalization. We're not just memorizing the word and then forgetting about it. We're understanding a rule, using it, and then therefore we're internalizing it. There's a difference between memorizing the word roller coaster by scrolling on Anki, whereas going to an amusement park with your family, and then you as a kid, you ask your mom, what is that? And your mom said roller coaster. Or there's an ad that was talking about this roller coaster, and now you know what the word roller coaster is, right? You didn't memorize it, right? You didn't have to memorize it, but still you had learned it. But you hadn't just learned it, you had internalized it. Why? Because you had repeated it in context in many situations. The way to learn grammar is that. Let me explain. The framework to simply understand it is grammar is just a bunch of rules and patterns. It is just a bunch of patterns, okay? Your ability to recognize patterns and use them is literally actually one way to define intelligence. You know those IQ tests? IQ tests are literally patterns and then you try to recognize them. So it is true, grammar is hard in that, if you think about it in that way. But is math hard? Is it hard to do 8 times 6, right? Or is it hard to divide 50 by 10? It's like, when you were first learning it, it's like, sure, it's hard. But then when you started recognizing the patterns, it's like, oh, 50 divided by 10 is 5. And 8 times 6 is 48. As a kid, maybe it's harder, but because you recognize the patterns, now you're able to apply them in different situations. The framework I like to think of it are the 3 W's, and grammar is just these 3 W's. What, where, and why. Most people learn the what and the where and not the why. The why is the internalization. Let me explain. Firstly, it's the what. What is the verb, for example? What vocabulary are we using, right? So es, for example, is a conjugation of a verb. It's from ser, es, right? That's the what. Now we know what it is. This is like bare bones. This is what everyone knows these. Where is the structure? And that is where rules and patterns come in. No comes before the verb, so it's no es, right? The thing that gets the verb done to them, like the it or the him or whatever, it comes before the change verb, for example. Or adjectives come after the noun, so it's not the black car, but it's the car black, el carro negro. It's not el negro carro, right? So these are rules for where, but the most important is why. Why is normal the same in English and Spanish? Why? Because of Latin roots. Because Spanish is a Latin language, 75% of Spanish is Latin. English is a Germanic language but has Latin roots. Therefore, the word presentation is also presentación in Spanish, for example. And so the reason why knowing the why is important is because when you know why something happened, it makes more sense. And when something makes sense, it clicks in your brain. And when it clicks in your brain, then you remember it. This is how we learn patterns as humans. A lot of people say they're visual learners, and that is just another one of these like things that people don't really know about. You're not a visual learner. It's just you're a learner based on a comprehensible pattern. And to comprehend something, you need to know why, right? Comprehend is to literally know why. And so when there's a picture, when there's like an image, you understand the why better. That's the point, right? That's why people say they're visual learners or they're contextual learners. It's like, no, you're not. We're all the same, bro. You're not different, okay? Everyone learns the same, okay? It's just that some methods teach the why better, okay? Visual maths explains why certain things happen in math better than like written math, for example. Point being, normal is the same in Spanish. Sure, you know now the what, and you know the where as well, slightly, but you don't know the why. Meaning, if I just told you this, it didn't compute in your brain. You didn't get the aha, right? But if I told you that it's because of Latin roots, because you know the why, it makes more sense. This is what language transfer did for me. And as a total result, grammar made sense to me after about 30 to 40 hours. It made sense to me after I took the language transfer course twice, so about 24 hours of listening to a course. And then also a little bit like implementing those rules in actual native speech and like listening to natives. And so this last point is just that grammar does not actually take a long time to learn, because things making sense doesn't take that long to learn, right? I had a client actually, and this idea of por versus para, okay, that's another grammar rule in Spanish, right? It didn't make sense to him for the longest time. And in around about 30 minutes of me just explaining it to him, he just had like this, oh, sort of moment, okay? And that is because I explained to him the why. I didn't just tell him where por and para can be used, but I told him why they are used like that. Why is por put in this place in the sentence? Why is it por even? Why is normal normal? When I explained that to him, he had like this, oh, now it makes sense. He'd spent hours previously with tutors explaining to him like lists of por versus para, and it didn't make sense to him because of course it's not going to make sense to him. It's like that meme where they have a board of all the different mathematical terms and, do you know what I mean? It's like looking at that versus just understanding it like a normal person. It's like that meme. Have you seen that? My method versus the teacher's method, okay? The teacher's method is like the most complicated thing ever, whereas your method, it's still the right answer. It's just much simpler and understandable. It's kind of like that. Most people are doing this what and where they're not like explaining it, they're just memorizing it. When it comes to grammar, of course. But in grammar, the most important thing is understanding the why. The 3 W's, the what, the where, which most people already do, but not the why. Most people don't learn the why, which is why when I teach clients, or when I have like a Spanish course where I explain the entirety of grammar, and in that course, I specifically only explain the why behind these rules. I tell you the rule, right? And then I give you sentences where that rule is used, so that when that sentence is used, the question for why did that sentence happen? Why did we use these words, or why did we have this structure in this sentence? You will know why. And because you know why, now it makes sense. And when it makes sense, then grammar doesn't take a long time to learn. When it makes sense, then now you're able to see the patterns in everyday situations in Spanish. And so that's what I do in my Spanish course. I'm not trying to sell you on it, though I do have a coaching service, which you can check in the description. So to summarize, all of these myths can be true only if you do the wrong things. You do have to use Anki to memorize if you're ignorant of how to learn Spanish correctly. You cannot start speaking from day one if you don't know what to do to speak from day one, right? Like, you can't get fluent in a month. It's possible to get fluent in a month. It's just that you can't do it in a month because you are ignorant. You don't know how to do it. And so I hope this video broke those false beliefs for you. Last one as well. Grammar is hard for you to learn, not because grammar is hard, but because it's hard for you because you haven't understood how to learn Spanish. And that is no insult to you or anyone, because I used to be the exact same. When I tried learning Arabic, I went on Duolingo, I tried memorizing the alphabet. You know, I didn't learn the numbers when I started learning Spanish. I didn't know how to tell the time in Spanish. I still don't know how to tell the time. I didn't even learn the alphabet in Spanish. Literally, I don't know the alphabet in Spanish. So, like, it kind of goes to show what's important or not. I hope this video helped you. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching or you're interested in the Spanish course, then check the description. And hope this video helped you, bro. And stay humble.